Sam Lipman, lecturer of film scoring at the Butler School of Music.
Well, welcome back to the podcast. And we are a couple of weeks away from a major event, right? The premiere, the world premiere, right? So I can't wait to talk to you a little bit about this. So Trumpet Concerto, right? That you finished a few months back, right? And now about to have its world premiere. So talk, how did this come about?
Yeah, okay. So in a previous life, I was a jazz musician, right up, I would say, till my mid-30s. And I kind of went back to school to pursue my dream of orchestral composition here. And during those years of being a jazz musician, I would tour and travel around. And one of the people I got to tour with was this local trumpet player, Ephraim Owens, who I'd actually been playing not just with jazz groups, but with funk groups, rock groups, country.
And what instrument are you playing at this point?
I was playing saxophone.
Saxophone, okay.
Tenor saxophone. Yeah. And at one point, we were on tour at the Kauai Jazz Festival. We were there with a guy called Paul English, who is a Houston legend, amazing jazz pianist and composer. And actually on faculty, I think either Rice or U of H. I'm not sure which. And we were out there in Kauai, and we were staying in this magnificent location, which was one of the sponsors of the jazz festival was this guy, Walt, who had made his fortune as a sail builder. He literally built the sails, the fabric, for the America's Cup yachts.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not sure if that was all he did, but he was pretty well off. He had this beautiful house there was a beach it was right out of the town called Lihue, which is in Kauai. And the beach went down to the water. There was a canal to the right going past, and then this giant mountain to the right, just going all the way back, which allegedly was owned by the Home Depot guy. So anyway,
you're doing well with that in your neighborhood, though. That's the Home Depot
guy.
That's this guy. Yeah.
Totally. So one night we were all, the four of us, myself, Ephraim, another Austin legend, Chris Marsh on the bass, and yet another Austin legend, Rob Casanel, a dear friend of mine, drummer. We were all out on the beach. We were actually drinking whiskey. And it was like, I don't know, 1 a.m. We were having a laugh. We were having a great time, and we were looking up at the beautiful stars. And one of us was like, I think it was Chris, he was like, guys, if you could have anything in the world, what would you do? And I think, I can't remember if it was Ephraim who went first or myself, but I think it was me. I said, if I could do anything, I'd be writing orchestral music, because that's the best music. They're like, shut up. And then Ephraim said, I'd be playing your orchestral music. And we all laughed. And we'd had a lot of whiskeys. And it was 10 years ago. All right. So I want to say it was like 2014.
Okay.
So we came home, and that was it. And several years later, I had just graduated from my master's here, and I was thinking about things and projects, and I still played with Ephraim. I played in his jazz quintet. And for some reason, that thought came to mind. That's right. I was going to write a piece for Ephraim and the Austin Symphony, or for a symphony. So I was engaged to orchestrate music for Sarah Jane Daly, who's wife of Peter Bay, the conductor. We were in New York doing a thing called Sing Out, which was a fantastic thing. It was an initiative to raise money for trans students across the country, many of whom flew in for this event, and they raised a lot of money. It was great. And I was hanging out with Peter at a party, and I was like, Peter, what are the chances of me writing a piece for Ephraim Owens? And he was like, nah. Not very high. You'd have to get it past the board. I don't think they'd be very interested. I was like, okay, well, I got to start somewhere. So I went home and sketched a few things, sent them to Ephraim. He played over them. We got together and talked, and we got some things happening with MIDI, and I sent it back to Peter. And he's like, this is interesting, how about, you try to present to the board? And at some point, I can't remember how it all happened, but we put an event together. And we threw an evening event. We invited everyone, the board of the symphony, all the supporters. I mean, I literally stalked them. And strangely, they all showed up. And we played I think the third movement, the main theme of the third movement we'd recorded. And we played a couple of jazz standards and another couple of excerpts that got in here. And they all clapped and loved the idea. And one of them approached me and said, how can we support you? What do you need?
Oh, wow.
We'd like to sponsor you. How much money do you need for all of this? And I was like, I asked for an amount, and I was very, very lucky and pleased that they went for it. So Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge sponsored the project.
Okay. It's just incredible. So let's dive into this a little bit. So
Sure.
I noticed on the first page, there's almost like this disclaimer, the performance notes.
Oh yeah.
So can we just talk about that a little
Sure.
bit? So is this normal with concertos? Like I know the orchestra is always supposed to kind of follow the soloist, but did you put this here because this is more than a normal? Is this more than like a Rachmaninoff concerto or something like that?
I would say, owing to the different nature of jazz, in jazz music, the soloist will take large liberties between. I mean, once the beat's going, it's a thing, but things like cadenzas, introductions, I really wanted Ephraim to really feel at home in front of the orchestra and not feel kind of afraid or boxed in. It's really a psychology thing. I wanted the conductor to kind of really serve Ephraim and not the other way around. I wanted to establish that early on, if that makes sense. It doesn't really boil down to any single pecking order. It's just an overall philosophy of the piece.
Is this is this mainly to the conductor, would you say? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've had several meetings with Peter, and he's fantastic. I really didn't need to put this in, I don't think. This is really for if and when the piece goes further.
Yeah, of course.
With conductors who I don't have the chance of meeting with. They'll see this and they'll get an idea of like, follow the leader. Don't be the leader. If possible.
Yeah. No,
Very
it's awesome. So let's dive into this. So let's talk about just overview of movement 1. So what's kind of going on here?
It's so the whole piece. I'm a really formal type of composer. I love the old forms. I love sonata form. I love theme 1, theme 2, transitions, intros, outros. So it's very much in that vein. 3 movements. This first movement is like
I don't think about that though, like a jazz trumpet player. Like this kind of traditional.
Well, you do though, because jazz music is very formal. It has to be, because there's no score, so you have to have a preset, agreed upon chunks of time. You have to have 32 measures up here. You have to have 16 measures. So everyone knows we're on the same page.
Okay.
So because of that, you have these pretty rigorous forms.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about jazz that way. I always thought it was very informal. But in reality, I guess you're right. It's more formal. It has
strong, concrete underlying foundation. But on top of that, it is extremely free. So you're very free to do what you want as long as you're counting.
Yeah, you can't go 18 bars.
Right. If you go 18 and they're 16, you're off. The chord's going to be off from what you're playing. So in this sense, this is very much like if this could be a Mozart concerto. We have first movement is a slow introduction.
Okay.
Which happens right up until measure number 34.
So it starts with the trumpet, only the trumpet?
Trumpet, right? You can see trumpets playing with just low basses and timpani.
Oh, yeah.
And timpani. Timpani is rolling a low G very, very softly.
And what does that sound like? That's just that introduction.
So it's suspenseful. It's commanding the audience to listen. Listen to this. The piece has begun. It gives an underlying sense of gravity. It's the kind of thing you hear if you hear in a horror film, like a low drone. Something's off.
Yeah.
Something's around, some spirit or some motive is around. So this slow introduction is all about setting the tone for the piece. It's basically a New Orleans jazz blues. It's a blues dirge or a blues march is what's happening. Very slow.
Okay.
And I find that in this city of the music capital of the world, there's a lot of tokenism and music tourism that goes with the blues. And in that, the blues tends to lose its sense of gravity of its true connection. And it's really, the blues starts as and this is things I've learned from Ephraim, is it's really a protest music. It's an activist music. It's not just about entertainment, it's about expression. So I really wanted to deliver the blues in its most powerful form, this kind of dark, brooding, like calamitous sound. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to just have Ephraim come out and just establish himself in the beginning of the orchestra. In the beginning of the piece. He's a bit of a alpha male, as you could say, a bit of an ego, as most trumpet players are. Sorry, trumpet players. It's just how it goes. And I wanted him to feel comfortable, come out, how do I say, just establish himself as the center of this piece without having to read or count or anything. So it's very much a rubato introduction. You'll see there are no measured lines.
Oh, yeah.
So he's to take this intro as slow or fast as he wants and just feel the room and tune in with the audience. That's very much a thing in jazz, is reading the room. It's not something in classical, because you're always going to play the same thing the way it's written in classical music. Whereas here, Ephraim's going to stand on stage, he can feel the energy of the room. He's going to look out at the audience. Are they sort of buzzing? Or are they lower? And he'll respond in kind. He may play it faster. He may play it slower.
And like the timpani player will follow him.
The timpani's just holding the role. But what you see in the trumpets are putting mutes in the trumpet section behind Ephraim.
Okay.
And they're doing what's called triple tonguing. And what they're doing is echoing Ephraim's notes back at him, almost like, if you think of electronic music, like a delay pedal or a reverb.
Oh, wow.
And adding a dimensionality to the piece. So Ephraim's going to play, he'll pause, and those same notes will then spread back through the trumpet section.
Oh, how cool is that?
So, well, yeah, it's kind of a more contemporary context, concept of, I want to say, I studied with Yevgeny Charlotte here, who taught me about sort of foreground and background.
Okay.
And the glow, building a glow behind the foreground material. So that's happening here. And this kind of happens throughout the piece. So there you have the slow introduction. After Ephraim plays this opening, almost like a prayer, it's only 8 measures long. The strings and the entire orchestra play the same thing, but they grow into this massive, it's very Shostakovian, quartal harmony. It's not at all standard tonal harmony. It just grows outside of standard harmony using fourths and perfect intervals. I hope I'm not getting too technical or nerdy here.
No, it's great. So is that a jazz? Are these jazz concepts?
It is. So in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a jazz trumpeter called Woody Shaw who really pioneered this idea of the cycle of fifths or the cycle of fourths. When I was a kid, I studied chemistry, and one thing we learned about was the way electrons can escape sometimes to become a different, in nuclear reactions, one atom will somehow grab hold of another proton and become another atom, right? It's usually a pretty violent thing.
Yeah, it can be violent.
It can be violent.
Yeah.
So the musical analogy is that if you keep playing la 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 la, you break out of the key you're in.
Okay.
And you move to a new key. And there's this essence of flow between keys. You could call it intermodulation in a way that's entirely natural. And you really hear that in Woody Shaw's trumpet playing and his compositions. And I haven't really heard it from anyone else. There's a little bit in Aaron Copland liked it. There are a lot of concepts that were developed in the 1960s and 70s that I love that have just kind of fallen by the wayside. And that's one that features throughout this piece. Another composer that really highlights this stuff, and one of my favorites, is a guy called Mieczysław Weinberg, composer from Poland, again in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. He was actually a protege of Shostakovich, and has a story very similar to my own grandparents, Holocaust survivor, lived just running away from either the fascists or the communists, like one, back and forth across Europe. Terrible story, but incredible music. So what happens is the orchestra takes this theme and grows to gargantuan proportions. This is part of my fantasy of getting to write for a big orchestra. It's like, use it while you got it. Yeah. So there's this massive...
And you waste no time, right? Because
not at all.
So we're like measure like 20-ish, right?
We're straight in. I mean, it's very slow. It's very slow. And it goes into some really screaming dissonance on page 3 here. That again ties in with this concept of blues expressing terrible things in history, things that we don't want to remember, that we've swept under the carpet, but truly terrible things. And I always felt related to Ephraim in that my family, most of whom were killed in concentration camps, and and the ones I'm descended from had to live, on nothing and flee around the world, trying to get out of Europe. So we had this bond in common. And I feel that by studying that music of Weinberg, post-concentration camp Europe, I was able to create a language that bridged both of these cultures in some way.
Okay.
And that's
awesome.
So that's that's kind of a heavy
start.
And then when I got to the end of this, I did futz and fiddle with more sort of darker protest language, and it just felt that a little overindulgent for audiences. I was like, at this point, we got to get the show rolling, right? And that's part of Ephraim, is he's a true showman, and I've learned that working with him for decades. Is part of being a musician is also being an entertainer. Yeah. I'm not a purist like some composers are just. It's all about being an artist as a composer. I feel that we have a responsibility to put bums in seats, to get people excited, to have them want to sing along. Yeah.
Tap their foot sometimes.
Tap their feet, nod their head. And so...
They're probably not tapping their feet by this point, though.
Right now, it's like... it's a little bit like you went to see, I don't know, like Schindler's List, and everyone's like, oh my God. But we get to A, measure 34, and we launch into this... where the form begins. So as I said, Haydn Symphony, you always start with a slow intro, which doesn't repeat. And then you just go into your form, which is typically going to be A, B, A. And A will have 2 themes, theme 1, transition, theme 2, some kind of development in the middle. It'll go to a middle section, which is typically more lyrical. And then it'll conclude with, we'll go back to that A section. Okay. This very much fits that mold.
And how do you come up with the theme? Like, does it come, like some people say it comes in your sleep, or like how does that happen?
For this, I'm just looking for the most apropos thing that Ephraim would want to play. Okay. What would he want to play? Or what would the piece call for? What delivers the most bang for the buck? That sounds rather business-like, and maybe it is.
Now, when you were writing like themes, would you show it to him and like have him play it and get that input?
Yeah. Well, what I would do for a lot of this piece is I went out to hear him play and I recorded him with a little Zoom HN5 recorder. Went home.
Stealthily?
No, he knew.
No? Okay. Did the club know though?
Yeah, it was mostly at the Continental Gallery.
Okay.
And I would play with him.
Yeah, okay. I'm just giving you.
Yeah. Stealing notes from behind enemy lines. No, I would record him, take it home, and then transcribe it, write out what he played.
Oh, wow.
And then put it right into this piece.
Wow.
So that, A, it would be easy for him because he already knows what he's playing.
Yeah.
Right? And B, for those same lines to go to filter through the orchestra, have the strings play, the violin ones play exactly what Ephraim would play, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, in that case...
Was there a certain night or show that like it's just the stars aligned and...
There's one recording of him that I sourced quite a lot from back when this was like 15 years ago. He played in Dallas. It's a live recording of him. He was really in good shape that night. And he was on fire. And he plays on a jazz tune called You Don't Know What Love Is. And I stole liberally from that recording. Transcribed it. Yeah. It's really every jazz musician has their bag. in quotes, which is their bag of tricks, their bag of licks, their bag of phrases that they work on and polish.
Yeah.
Right? Only so many, because we don't have that much time to have it infinite. So you've got your 10 or 20, whatever it is, your signature things that you do. And so I'm pretty aware of his bag, having played by his side for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So I put those lines, they're all woven in the piece.
Okay.
But this first movement really draws on that fourth concept. If you look in measure number 56, sorry, measure number 36.
36.
My
Okay,
bad.
yeah.
Yeah, you see this concept right here.
Yeah.
So you've got fourths in the up right hand moving up,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got notes moving downwards in fourths or thirds in the left hand, and you have this. It's like a pseudo tonality that was popular. You hear a lot in the early works of Hindemith, actually mid works of Hindemith. Pseudo tonality. It behaves like tonality, but it's not beholden to the same rules, and it can easily escape. So it's like a super tonality that really excites me. This idea of, if you think of it like painting, I always think of key or tonality as color.
Okay.
So if you look at a painting and you see shifts of color from purple to green to red to whatever.
Like subtle shifts?
It can be subtle, it can be violent, it can be whatever you want. But the idea of different keys and the intermodality between them as, shift between color in the background. So that's how I compose key is color for me.
Okay.
And then you'll see that this line throughout this first fast movement, there's a whole lot of imitation in this piece. I really love that concept of hocket or imitation, which really comes from medieval music, from motets, of having one line in one singer's part, and then you hear it later in the second singer's part and the third. It's kind of like a fugue.
Okay.
So that's features all through this first movement. The theme is pre-introduced at measure 34. We hear it bounce around the orchestra until, bang, measure number 41, Ephraim comes in. Just him and the strings playing that main theme. You'll see it's in fourths.
Yeah.
And it goes on in this kind of way. It might sound a little Star Trek-y to younger audiences. It may sound a little dated. That's a risk that I take. There's a lot of pressure to sound new and shiny and kind of innovative in contemporary composition, which it's just not my thing.
Okay.
To me, if you're trying to do something new, is to just kind of deny what came before us. And I can't do that. I'm too in love with what we already have. Yeah. And want to be a part of that. So I'm kind of pretty old-fashioned, I would say.
Well, it's interesting you say Star Trek is old-fashioned. I mean, that's like in classical music world, that's like, I mean, we're talking like, what was that, like the 60s? Star Trek? Yeah.
This trend of fourths and melodies was big in the 60s. And I think it just, like any trend, they date quickly. Yeah. They sound dated pretty quickly. Like come the 80s, it was like, no, we want sparkly synthesizers and very drone elements and long extended tonality. As opposed to the 60s, you've got modulation, things are changing key, it's exciting musically. The idea of this fourth melody is about power, the power to escape your given tonality. So in the context of the story of the African American, the power to escape from the terrible realities that they found themselves in. And from my story is that my grandfather, who I'm named after, escaped 2 concentration camps, not just one, but 2. He lost 15 siblings. He was 2 of 17, and only 2 of them escaped, including his parents.
Well, how did he escape 2?
He was smart, and he was very, very lucky. He was in Łódź, which is in Poland, and then I think he was also in Warsaw, and he escaped both and ended up in Australia.
Like actually, like jump the fence, or like kind of like oh wow.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I don't think any of us know.
Oh wow.
How he got out, because he didn't live to tell us about it. Well, I mean, he wouldn't talk about it when my mum was young. And sadly, he took his own life when she was a teenager. He had a lot of survivor's guilt. But the idea
that whole generation never, like, all my family that was in World War II, they just do not talk about it.
Not talking about it.
And it's so sad because then the following generations, we don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it's better that way, though. Maybe he had to kill to get out, and he didn't want us to know that. Who knows? And so this idea of escape through power and grace, this graceful fourth structure that, again, ties in with physics and science. And so that really drives this first movement. There's a second theme that's very delicate and could have come straight from the pen of like Wayne Shorter.
Where's that?
Who's a really well-loved jazz composer. Page 10, measure number 69. So from this section, it goes from this lively, exciting, dramatic, sort of fast texture into this slower, more beautiful, kind of like a jazz ballad. It doesn't slow tempo, but the texture gets thinner. The strings, instead of bowing each note, they start to do like they're playing quieter, and they're starting to slur, as you can see in the texture. And then it could be a Wayne Shorter record. The jazz, the melodies, all about these what are called planing chords, where you might have, instead of chords moving in the cycle of fifths, which is typically what they do in earlier jazz music, very functional, also in most classical music, earlier classical music, they start to move. Planing means they'll move by step.
Oh, okay.
And that's really more a Debussy thing. It comes out of, I would say, early 20th century. We start to hear it quite a lot in modernism.
Very cool.
And we also heard a lot in the music of Herbie Hancock, of Wayne Shorter, and this era of 1960s jazz music. So we hear that second theme. It's more delicate.
Now, did that also come from a recording? Is that inspired from a recording, or is this?
No, this came straight out of my heart. It just kind of wanted to come out. I think a lot of times composing is just waiting for the music to suggest what's next. Another strain throughout this is film music. And having worked in film for a couple of years, I've really got to study and learn from John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, all these great film composers, who feature these really big gestures. They really take the full advantage of the orchestra, and they in turn studied, all the great, the Wagner, the big orchestra works, Tchaikovsky, to name a few. And so I've really been mindful of that. So there's a lot of big orchestral gestures going back and forth between Ephraim and the orchestra.
Okay.
So typically when he's playing, they're supporting him and they're quieter. But then he'll stop and they bloom into this big texture. I really want them. I want it to be exciting, and I want people to fall back in love with orchestras, because I do think there's a disconnect between orchestras and normal people.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we have John Williams and people who come out to see Star Wars, right?
It's a completely different crowd, right? There'll be no overlap between the Star Wars crowd
and the Brahms crowd.
Yeah. Maybe there is. I don't know.
No, it's a good point. Yeah. But will they come out and hear the next Missy Mazzoli hit with the New York Synth? Probably not.
Yeah.
And it's, I think I grew up, I spent years as a rock musician, touring with rock bands and singing. And I really learned to respect the commerce nature of it, the business side of music. Like, yeah, you've got to sell seats. You've got to take into mind these people, and not just your brilliant genius artist's vision,
And you want them to you want the audience to be happy. You want them to go home, and so that was an awesome experience.
I want them to sing. I want them to go home singing. I want the melodies stuck in their head.
Yeah. Which is not when you see a new work on the program at a symphony concert. That's not usually what happens.
Well, there's talk of like the death of melody, and this is something that's happened in film scoring. There's a lot of debate. One of the things we study in my class is what happened to melody in the 2000s, particularly in the Marvel franchise with the works of Hans Zimmer. There's really a disappearance of melody. Melody in the sense, I mean, there are still solo instruments, but the melody in the sense of an anthem, a theme that we would all sing that would express us. Gosh, I feel like I'm getting far from the topic.
No, yeah, it's great.
But this is a big part of my work is melodicity.
Okay.
Singability. Particularly in this work. So there's a return to the first theme. So this is very much in terms of jazz. If you look at the score at letter C, measure number 101, you'll see slash marks in the trumpet part.
Oh, yeah.
So at this point, Ephraim will start improvising.
Oh, okay.
So just like in a jazz piece, you have traditionally in jazz work, you'll get on stage, you'll play the head, which is the melody. You usually play it twice with a little variation the second time. Then you improv over the same chords that went under the head.
Do you think he'll be able to actually improvise, or will he write it out? Because
No.
That must be intimidating to stand in front of the long center. I guess when you've done it your whole life.
You've done it your whole life.
Yeah.
What would be intimidating is if you had to read stuff.
Okay.
That would be intimidating for Ephraim. No, he's much more comfortable just responding, hearing the music and responding to it. That's what he does. That's what we do as jazz musicians. There's a process. We have our bag of language that we have, but there's this subconscious almost process of just shutting our eyes and just playing. We don't know what we're going to play, but typically it's some assemblage of that bag of that language.
Cool. Awesome. Well, you want to jump to movement 2?
Sure, yeah. The second movement I knew movement 1 and 3 were going to be fast. So in the typical sonata form, which was really established by Vivaldi back in the 1600s of fast, slow, fast.
Okay.
3 movements, fast, slow, fast, or slow, fast, slow. But I figured for the first piece I'm not going to go slow, fast, slow. You got to something fast.
Yeah.
Give him something fast. So this second movement slow. One of the first conversations we had about inspiration on this piece was Ephraim had mentioned this song called Eye on the Sparrow. His eye is on the sparrow, which is a very popular black gospel song that gets played in churches. And the words are about, even in the hardest times, God is watching over you. Even his eye is even on the little creatures, the sparrows.
So almost a gospel, would you say? Is gospel influence here?
Sure. Very much so. Yeah. So this movement is about finding that courage in dark times. And so it's kind of like another very minor, it feels like a New Orleans kind of dirge, right? This beginning of this movement. In fact, this whole movement is pretty slow. There's the first movement. Second movement it goes to a major key, and it's a little more like the sun comes out, and there's hope. There's a reason to have hope.
It's America. You got to end it on a happy.
Well, it doesn't end with that.
No, okay.
But it does. It takes us there.
Okay.
It's very similar to. It's very much Beethoven. This second movement in form.
Okay.
It's got all kinds of little Beethoven Easter eggs in there.
So point out one of those Easter eggs. Just one of them.
We have strings playing, and we go from loud, then we have very quiet. Suddenly we have just woodwinds for a measure, and then we go back into boom, timpani and strings, and then again, back just to the. It's like, it's the feeling is like. Something almost warlike suddenly, and then suddenly the clouds, the sun comes through the clouds, right? And then we're back in the grind, and then again this holy sky thing is happening. That's what I mean by Beethoven. His back and forth, it's stark contrast between dark and light. And then at end we feature improv. We're back to repeating the melody. We've gone back to, but now you'll notice that bass clarinet and flute at end have got that very bluesy melody together in 2 octaves apart. I'm really looking forward to hearing that. And it goes, it's like, it's like a blues melody. So they're going to be playing this very bluesy melody, but together. So it's going to be fun to see how Peter rehearses that, because it's got to be a little behind the beat, as opposed to classical. Everything's very much as written. It's got to be a little laid back, as is written in the score. We'll see how that goes. And then you'll see through this section, measure 74 onwards, that Ephraim has, see the chord symbols above his part?
Oh, I do, yeah.
So he'll be playing just like a jazz solo. And he'll be playing through those chord changes. And very simple. It's just like a it's like a blues and a minor blues, really. This last movement really, for me, needed to feel like victory. It needed to feel like a fight. Like the fight is on. It's on, right? And
The fight you win.
But we win.
Yeah.
I shouldn't tell you.
Okay.
He's a fantastic TV composer who wrote for a lot of he scored this film called Bullet. Anyway, iconic writing from the 1960s and 70s. If you ever watched like MacGyver, the TV show,
Oh yeah.
you'll hear the same kind of dissonant clusters, muted trombones. They play these accents, housetops that go, and so lots of dissonance. It's very much film action music. One of my favorite memories of Ephraim is he loves to play things that have what's called a 16th note groove. So when we come out of jazz, which is typically swing and eighths, the 16th note groove is like a tick, 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 tick. And he loves to be like, bop, and just, he dances while he does it. This is a part of his musical personality, just but one part of it. And we had to get it into the piece. And so the hi-hat, normally with orchestral music, it's hard to pinpoint exactly who owns the rhythm. It's easy. In jazz, it's always the bass player. The bass player owns the rhythm. But in classical, it's the conductor, right? But even though the conductor owns the rhythm, you're always about half a second behind him. So it's very complex and wonderful the way time works with orchestral music. And a real problem for someone like Ephraim who's never played with an orchestra. So the hi-hat makes sense. I also heard it in one of my students' works, Joe Jackson, fantastic composer, who loves to stick hi-hats in his work, and it makes sense. It crystallizes where the beat is, so everyone can zero in on that beat.
Yeah, the hi-hats. Jazz, it's always like that. You always hear that hi-hat clicking. Close. You know, that's
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's a pre-introduction of the main theme. It's buried. Ephraim will be improvising in this opening, but nothing intelligible. Mostly like just fun, entertaining, exciting to watch.
Yeah. Like us says, just respond to the music.
Just respond to the music. And you'll see a lot of muted brass, which gives this metallic kind of searing sound that grabs you. Finally, when we get to the main theme, so there's this big intro that could be from an action film. And incidentally, that action music of La La Chou from the 70s is in turn very influenced by music by Bela Bartok and some of the Eastern composers. He takes his concepts very much from Bartok's Microcosmos and works like that feature chromatic two voice counterpoint. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It doesn't, but
so it's the idea of, before this, counterpoint was pretty much always diatonic. It would always obey the rules of the key.
Okay.
So for in C major, our counterpoint moves along those notes of C major. Chromatic counterpoint obeys the distance. So if my upper note goes up a whole step, my lower note will go down a whole step. Forget whatever key we're in, it doesn't matter.
Oh, wow.
So this goes back to the early concept of working between keys, a supertonality where you can shift seamlessly through keys while still referring to them somewhat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'm nerding out again. So
no, it's great.
So the main theme comes in at Q. And this is really exciting because the orchestra builds to this massive Bruckner type of da 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 stop.
Oh yeah.
Massive sound. And then the trumpet piano. All by their lonesomes. So I've got a pianist playing this da 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 da. And this is symbolic of our relationship. It's like Ephraim and the pianist. It's like this is where we're coming. We're coming from 2 instruments, 3 instruments. We're coming from jazz, right? This is a reminder of where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And you'll see that the theme played by the trumpet, da 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 da, It sounds a bit like a superhero theme. It's about the super strength it takes to break through adversity. It's about the minor seventh interval. This big leap, which is kind of hard to do on a brass instrument. Like you don't just change your fingers, you've got to really change your embouchure as well. It's a bit of a challenge, and I wanted to give Ephraim a bit of a challenge. He wanted a challenge in this final movement.
And the emotion of the piece at this point is just you're like the audience is into it. It's high energy, would you say?
Yeah, it's very suspenseful and it's tense.
Yeah.
Right now, you're probably, hopefully, if you're not asleep, you're on the edge of your seat.
I don't think they're gonna be asleep.
Yeah. The second movement's a little slow, but so now, we're in very tense harmonic land where the harmonic sequence is very organically, it has momentum, but it's like nothing we've heard before. Mm-hmm. And so we get through this bill. You can see how tense it's getting up through an S. A lot of notes. This is probably the most busy part of the piece. This is where...
Yeah, lots going on at S.
So when we get to the second theme, this is where the piece takes its name, Cradled by Grace.
Oh, okay, great.
Cradled by Grace is a tune, just a very short, I want to say 16th bar melody that Ephraim wrote when he was a teenager. He'd written. And when I was asking him for inspiration on the piece, he gave it to me. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. Can we put it in? So he's part of this is partly by him, this piece. I have to give him credit because his melody is right here. And
that's at S?
Where does it... It's actually at T. Yeah, measure number 109, I think. Yeah.
So what
110.
So talk through that how did that 16 measures make it into this that he wrote when he was 16?
Yeah, I just took it and stuck it in there. I mean, it fit. It's a ballad, as we call it in jazz, which means it's a softer, heartfelt, slower piece of music, as opposed to a burner, which is what the first part of this is. So it was tricky to transition from this high energy to this more gentle energy.
Did you change it at all?
His piece?
Yeah.
I did. All I did was, the only thing I did was at the end of a phrase, I would extend by 2 beats.
Okay.
For a breath, for a pause, a cadence.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only way I changed it. Otherwise, it's exactly as he wanted it. You'll see a measure of 6/4 at measure number 115.
Yeah.
So that was not in his original piece, but originally it went da 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 da, and it went that way. But I was like, let's hold on one note. So now da 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 da, and that gives the orchestra chance to respond to the pretty melody. So I did that in a few spots.
How did he remember it? Has this been like important throughout his whole life? These 16 measures, or
he had it written down. He keeps what he's written, and he would play that track actually with his band every now and again. So measure number 166. There's a build, a big build. You can see on page measure 161 we have this massive run. Big hit. Measure 165. Now, if you look in measure number 166, we have bass drum. We have full percussion section.
Yeah.
I've got hats going, and it's like doom 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 straight up like hip hop beat, and the piano's like boom boom bam. The whole orchestra's going. You can see the basses, bass clarinets, all the low instruments going boom boom, and so we've got boom boom. Now Ephraim, this is his moment to shine because I've played lots of funk gigs.
I like how it just says funk.
When I first moved to Austin, Texas, the first thing I did was I joined a funk band, and we toured the country. I met my 2 best friends in the world. One of them became my best man at my wedding, and I was the best man at his wedding. Johnny Vogel sang. He's my best friend. Joined his band. We were I was 21, I guess, fresh off the boat from Australia. And We played at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996.
Oh, wow.
But I just fell in love with this funk music. It was so fantastic. And then Ephraim eventually played in that band.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how old our friendship is. So funk was how we met. And it was a way to make a living.
Yeah.
Because you'd tour, play colleges. You'd make a lot more money than you would playing jazz. Just, unless you were at the very, very top of jazz.
Yeah.
Which we weren't going to, I was never going to be really. So doing this, putting this funk in here was a part of our history. And it was like, screw it, I'm just going to go for it. It was kind of a John Corigliano moment.
Yeah.
So he's going to play high, exciting, fun over this funk stuff here. And then after that at W, measure 182, he stops. You'll see in horns, they're playing the Cradled by Grace melody. So now this is a full treatment of the Cradled by Grace 16 measure. It's like a hymn, really. It's a spiritual type of song. But now it's fully fleshed out for full orchestra with lots of, you can see there's a lot of polyphony, a lot of counterpoint going on in the strings and the woodwinds.
You wonder what, the first rehearsal, when he hears the whole orchestra playing this piece, these 16 measures that he wrote when he was 16, what that's just going to feel like to him. Right?
I actually shed a tear writing it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But he may be too preoccupied with playing his part because he's playing the melody.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Although it does say optional. It's he may want to just take it in because
that'd be cool if it was optional. He just stopped and
because the horns are playing it and they're a four. So four horns playing the same thing at fortissimo. You're going to hear them. They're going to be loud. And then there's like brass flourish and fanfares throughout. So it's a really decorated moment. And then we go to this really Mozartian thing where we get to the end of Cradled by Grace. We are done with the piece. Every theme's being done. So we have this denouement, this wind down into what I call the recap. You'll notice, okay, I'm going to quiz you, Nathan.
Okay.
Measure number 193 and onwards.
193. Okay.
Where have we seen that very minimal texture before? Who's the only two instruments playing at measure number 90?
So bass and what else is playing?
You tell me.
Is it at the very start?
That's correct.
Yeah. The timpani, the
timpani and the bass.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the very start.
We're going back and we're going to recap that slow introduction from the very start. And this time, though, as Ephraim plays through it, because you'll see he's got it again, every single theme from the piece, so each movement's had two themes, two primary themes and one transitionary theme. So that's a total of 8, or is it 9? 9 themes altogether, right? Each of those themes is recapped right now in the next 6 measures, 8 measures in different groups. So you'll see that in flute and bass clarinet, there's the main theme from movement 2. There's the main theme from movement 3 in the trombones. There's the second theme from movement 1 in trumpets. Following, so each of those themes is recapped in this moment.
Oh wow!
And only I would know that because only a nerd enough like me that worked hard on the piece will know that.
So you don't think the audience will pick up on it? There won't be something familiar about
I'm
it?
hoping they're not. I'm hoping yes, but I don't want anyone to be that intellectually attached to the piece. I want them to just feel the piece.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think if you were studying this piece, God forbid someone actually, looked at it, they might go, oh. And it's like it's kind of like in video games. Video game developers put what are called Easter eggs in, and like people that are really interested will find those Easter eggs.
Yeah.
So you would hope as a creator one day, if you work that hard on a piece, that there's a reward for someone who might learn from this piece or study it.
Wow.
And that's it.
Well, unbelievable. Just incredible. What do you think your dad would say if he saw this, like a jazz trumpet player?
Man, I have no idea. He'd probably be like, "Are you getting paid? How much are you getting paid?"
That's
for
right, because
this?
he was in business too, right?
Yeah, he always.
Yeah.
I mean, he harassed me my whole life about, when are you going to be able to buy a house, son? How are you going to find a decent wife if you've got no bloody money?
Yeah.
But no, I think he'd be really proud. I'm kidding. He's, we had a tough relationship for a couple of years, but I think he did not want me to be a musician, right? He had been a musician, but turned to business and done really well. I think he wanted me to do the same. And I was struggling. I was in New York. I was being a waiter for a long time. But towards the end of his life, he started coming out to hear me play and coming down. Hard to do. Saturday night downtown Austin, finding a place to park.
Yeah.
Pain. Here's my dad, he's 74, old, kind of figuring out, paying the door. He didn't tell me he was coming. I would have put him on the list. And there he is, listening to me play. And it was a beautiful circle. We ended on great terms. I think he would have been super proud of this.
Yeah,
I really did.
Incredible. So the concert's coming up. We're going to put all the information in the description below, but people should come out, see history, right?
Wow.
The world premiere. You're modest. I think this
history.
I think it has real legs, right? I mean, this might become, I can think of a lot of symphonies that would love to do this.
Gosh, I want to believe you so much.
I mean, there's a lot of symphonies that have it's like an Austin, like a Nashville symphony, right? They have kind of like the pop and, classical worlds coming together that the audiences would embrace.
I should mention that PBS are shooting a documentary around this piece.
Oh, wow.
And I've been in multiple interviews. Ephraim has been in interviews. Peter Bay has been interviewed. Lots of people. Steve Wertheimer, who's a big mover and shaker in the Austin music scene. He owns and runs the Continental Club in South Austin. He's big. He's interviewed. His jazz historian, Harold McMillan, he's being interviewed. And so there's a lot of excitement about this piece. There is.
Well, it's great. It's doing what classical music always wants to do, is like leave the concert halls and embrace the community, right? The Black community, the jazz community. I don't know if there's a film scoring community, but there's a lot of fans of film score music.
Sure. Yeah.
So, it's just people should come out, get your tickets, because you don't know when's the next time you'll see it again. And even when you see it again, you can always say, I was there for the first time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Get your tickets, and I will give you a free T-shirt. I mean, I don't know what it'll say, but
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
get your tickets. I'm really excited about this piece. Ephraim's excited. Peter is really excited. The filmmakers are really excited.
All right. Well, Sam, thanks so much for stopping in, and I can't wait to see it. So,
Nathan, thank you for having me, and thank you for this incredible work you're doing for the music and Butler community. It's great. We felt so invisible for so long. It's really nice to feel seen and heard.
Oh, I'm glad I'm able to help. So,
thank you.
Great.